Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
We're excited to announce a new podcast, Myths, Morals, and Money, in collaboration with Australian visionary Barry Lieberman from Small Giants. We explore our current economic system and planetary crisis through a Jungian lens. We discuss and analyze the myths that drive our current economic system, the shadows within us all that fuel consumerism and overconsumption, and consider the narrative that needs to be created to pivot us to a new economic system, all within the context of what is happening in the world right now. Check out the first 4 episodes on our website, thisjungianlife.com, and on our Small Giant partner at smallgiants.com.au/podcasts. Thanks.
And today we are going to talk about all of the things we do using virtual technology. We have all been very busy, I think, moving our lives online and zooming into friends, relatives, and certainly the clients that we see and talk with therapeutically. This is an idea that my friend and colleague Daniel Lehrman in Brooklyn, New York, offered and said, will therapy and the core of our work become more endangered in a culture and circumstances that conspire against it? On the other hand, it has saved people time, travel, automobile emissions. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what it's like in this new world of living online.
And I have to just start off by saying that we have to dedicate this episode to our friend, colleague, and mentor, Gus Swick of the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts. And for any IRSJA listeners out there, you know what I mean. and I can't help but think that this whole COVID-19 thing may have been a mastermind plot by Gus. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, absolutely.
His impish powers reaching us all.
Yes. Because Gus has long been a proponent of what we call the analytic third, which is a mysterious something that gets constellated between two people, that there's person A and person B, and then we've all had the experience of something very new that doesn't seem to belong to either one of the individuals alone, that, boom, enters the room, the interaction, the conversation, and that is a third thing.
Well, and Gus has also been a proponent of that this can work online, that online therapy and online supervision is valid. And there's been some tension in our professional society, as there has been, I'm sure, in many similar societies, as to whether online therapy works or is the same thing or is comparable, or, should we consider it as legitimate as face-to-face treatment? And obviously, world events have overtaken that discussion. And here we are. I mean, I'm working exclusively online at this point, as I think many people are.
And we can go right straight to Jung, who had carved above the door of his home the phrase, summoned or not, God will be present. And it's attributed to the Oracle at Delphi or other great murkily distant Greek philosophers. But that's the question, is whether this third or the God, the special something, can be present, alive, influential, over virtual technology? And are we being kind of Luddites in resisting it, or not? What is the value of the in-person connection, which clearly is to be preferred when possible? But is it essential? Is it necessary? As we wrestle with what events have forced us to do, which is live online.
I think Jung's work on synchronicity makes a really solid case for the validity of working at a distance. Jung came to feel that there is a unified energy that he called the collective unconscious that extends all the way from these rarefied archetypal realms down into matter itself. If we take that idea seriously, there is a way in which our personal, unconscious field is connected to all points in space if we can find a way to navigate those relationships. If we land or stand on that idea with some security, we could believe that as we are speaking to a client across the world in that moment, there is a living connection that may be invisible, but yes, vital, that doesn't require us to be in the same room.
So I like what you just said, and I agree with it, and I want to circle back to it, but I'm going to back up for a minute and kind of play devil's advocate and just bring in some other stuff, okay? Because it's not just therapy that's going online, it's socializing. People are having coffee dates and cocktail parties online. It's, school, obviously, for kids. It's all kinds of extracurricular activities that kids are involved in. And I am aware that as we become more technological and kind of disembodied, I mean, that's the thing about technology, right? Is that it's really disembodied. And I am hearing reports from parents in my practice of, their preschooler is being asked to have Zoom preschool. Well, how do you think that works? A 5-year-old is not compelled by the image of her classmates on the screen. It is not the same thing as being able to actually play. A Zoom play date when you're 5, it's not the same as being able to co-construct a world with a friend. I know if, kids who are now their chorus, they're having, Zoom choir, or which doesn't work. You can't do that. And I think that there's a way that there's a fatigue that comes with trying to pretend that it's the same thing. We don't have each other in the physical space. We can't make music together, or we can't sing together, or we can't dance together, or we can't touch. There's so much that gets lost. And, I'm in this position that I know many, many, many people are, where, with elderly relatives, I'm not going to see them in the flesh because I don't want to endanger them in any way. And so we are talking over Zoom, and it's wonderful. And it's not the same thing. So it certainly brings something. I'm so grateful for it. I'm so glad that we can see each other instead of just talking on the phone. And it does feel like we've connected, and it also isn't the same. So, and I think especially, for younger people, for little kids, not the same thing. For soccer, you can't have Zoom soccer. Not really. we can't, playing soccer together is something that you have to do in person. So I'm just wondering about that.
Well, I think I'm going to take a chance on articulating the other end of this polarity here that you've raised, Lisa, and acknowledge that certainly in person it has advantages that can never be replaced. And some things are simply impossible online. I moved from Brooklyn, New York to Cape Cod in the middle of 2018. And so I have had a practice that has been very substantially virtual. I made trips back to Brooklyn. Some people came to Cape Cod. But I have been surprised and touched at how much is really constellated, generated, and alive in a way that feels very real to me online for therapy, which is not preschool or family get-togethers for a virtual holiday, that process seems to me to be much more promising and fruitful and just generative than even I had imagined. And I think the role of imagining that person as I see him or her on a screen, of feeling truly present for one another, is surprisingly possible and does bring to mind that saying from Jung, that something is present. Psyche shows up.
And I don't want to move away from the negative just yet, though, Deb, because I substantially agree with you. And yet I wanted to stay for a few minutes, if I can ask us to do that, with what are we missing when we go online? And one of the things we're missing is embodiment. And when you're in the same room with someone, whether it's a client or your uncle, you hear each other's stomachs growl. You notice the tapping of the foot. You see the whole way the person sits or moves. There's just so much rich communication there. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, of course, and this is obviously not relevant when we're talking about therapy, but we get to hug each other. You know, having a Zoom coffee date, you know, you don't embrace each other when you see each other or give each other a kiss on the cheek. Now, perhaps we're not going to do that for a while anyway. But these are important things that get lost. And I also want to say there's something that's physiologically taxing about sitting in front of a screen. So, you know, I'm doing that all day for work, and then people want to have a Zoom coffee date or a Zoom cocktail party or a Zoom family catch up. And it's like, wow, I have to do that. I have to try to focus on the screen again. It's flat. It's two-dimensional. I've just been sitting all day. So I think we are missing a lot. We're missing a lot in our personal lives by doing this. And I think we also are missing something in the therapeutic realm as well.
I think one of the other things, to stay on this end of this imaginal polarity, is the sense of time that changes very much from having, you know, let's say a family dinner hour with, you know, an aunt and uncle who live a little ways away, or a holiday, or a play date with kids, or any of that stuff, that time kind of slows down as we just kind of hang out together and kind of fiddle around in the kitchen and set the table and interact in all those kinds of ways. Whereas a screen date of any kind it's going to start at this time, and it's going to go for, you know, some other length of time. And we have to sit still and be at our screen. And it is a very different experience of time. Or going to see your analyst. You get ready and get in your car or the subway or whatever it is. And so there's a whole sort of sense of time of getting ready, of what am I going to want to focus on this week. Psyche sort of can start to rehearse versus okay, it's almost, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's time for my appointment, and I'll just finish doing the dishes or putting something away, and then I'll have my appointment.
Yeah, there's, I've had a couple of people comment that they really miss the drive to my office, in which they would think about what they might want to talk about, and then the drive home, in which they would think about what we talked about. And there's also that way that now, when we're doing everything online, it's where we work, it's where we play, and there is less of a sense of temenos.
What this all brings up for me is that the journey to any encounter tempers how you arrive. So, if I'm, in the bedroom 4 feet away and I rush into the den and I start a session, the journey of those 4 feet is a different kind of journey than if I have to, take care of myself at home and have breakfast and drive to the office. And then I have my ritual of setting the office up and turning the lights on and making my coffee. All of the ways that I'm entering into the experience change how I am approaching it. And there's, I need to be able to cite this article that I had read recently. It's, I think the title is Being Late to the Meeting from Your Living Room.
Because of traffic, heavy traffic.
Yes, people are working from home and they're still arriving late to the computer to start, anything that they've agreed to start. So there's also a way in which we unconsciously still evoke our resistances and our habits unconsciously, perhaps even to maintain a familiarity as we move towards something, move towards an encounter. But when I think about going on a first date and all the ways that we prepare and all that we're imagining and the day or the several hours before and how we prepare and how we arrive, all of that is so integral to the experience that just clicking on the computer, of course, sidetracks.
Yeah. And, I do find that I have my little rituals now that I have long had a pretty substantial portion of my practice online as well. So this wasn't a very dramatic transition for me, but I've always had a certain kind of ritual about, okay, and I get the computer lined up and there's certain things that I like to have near me and I, have something to drink. And so I have my rituals entering into a virtual session. And I am finding that some of my clients have their own rituals that they'll want to do certain things before we speak. It's like, well, I'm running a minute late because I'm getting my tea or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be important for us all to have rituals to mark the transition into a liminal space so that we are crossing a threshold and that we're not simply going from Netflix clicking right into the session, that there's an intentionality of entering a kind of temenos. But it is harder to evoke, isn't it?
It is. And I think that it changes what's talked about. And I think this is true for both social relationships as well as psychotherapeutic relationships, is people just kind of bop online. And I can see 5 or 10 minutes that they're still shuffling papers, or literally they're like talking to somebody else that's in the room for a few minutes as they're kind of transitioning into being alone in the room. These are things that generally are not in the space, and yet it's a testimony to how adaptable, we all are, that still some piece of work can be done, even though the temenos, or the container of what's going to happen, is radically different. And a temenos is relevant to any event, any happening, which is just the context affects what happens inside of it.
And I think that there are advantages to online in terms of creating a container and a sacred space. I'm aware with clients of having some period of time right at the beginning of really allowing for that transition of daily life and sort of a social kind of conversation. Often it's, of course, about the coronavirus and how are you and what's it like, but that I consider that a transitional space and transitional conversation into that person's internal world. And I know a couple of people that have started to do online dating, younger people. And what they report is, wow, since I don't have to put on my persona, my makeup, do my hair, and dress a special way and go to a bar or a coffee shop, what are we doing? We're talking. That person and a new person that, in these two cases, she doesn't know. And so, in a way, it kind of cuts to the chase of, but who are you, without all of the social rituals and presentation or performative kinds of rituals that social situations, especially in a dating relationship, kind of call for.
Yeah, it drops you into intimacy very quickly, doesn't it?
And there's so fewer distractions around you. There's no ambient noise. There's all kinds of things that are different. Another example, which has been interesting, is I like the podcast The Daily, which is put out by the New York Times. And I guess it was last Friday, they had an episode called A New Way to Mourn. And the question was, how are funerals or, memorials happening in the world? And so it tracks this pastor whose spouse, who was a poet, had passed away. And they did the memorial and the singing and all these different things on Zoom. And at the end of it, the 60 or so people that had logged on consistently said that this is one of the most moving memorials they'd ever been to. And as they were thinking through why that would possibly be, that there was something about the screen focusing so intimately and so closely on the face of the people who were talking, which is not available when you're 20 feet away. That people were being so respectful of taking turns talking, and that when someone spoke, that the entire online moment was dedicated to their quiet speaking, and also being in an environment at home that was not overly observed, that people said their emotional experiences were much more present to them in the semi-privacy.
Yeah.
People were more likely to cry, for instance. It was a very interesting and I think unexpected outcome.
And this is kind of going back to where you were a few minutes ago, Deb. Like I said, I've had a portion of my practice online for years. I have found that in some cases, eye contact online is so intense. It is deeply, deeply intense, almost overwhelmingly so. So that in some cases, I've had to make accommodations by making sure the computer's really far away, because it's so, there's an immediacy to it.
When we're talking to, whether it's a client or a friend, the whole screen is kind of taken up by their face, and all the other ambient environment in a room, in a restaurant, in an office isn't there to kind of titrate the intensity of it. I mean, it's every little movement of those eyebrows or kind of dancing out a whole paragraph of meaning. You're absolutely right. It's very intense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here's another thing that I like about meeting people online. I have a couple of people that I've worked with, some for long periods of time, whose personal space is important to them in one way or another. So perhaps I've been hearing for years about the person's art studio. Or, someone bought a new house a year and a half ago and was really, really excited about it. And, maybe showed me pictures in my office. But now I'm like, wow, show me around. Give me the tour. Let me see, So like now I've seen these spaces that are important to people that they've been telling me about. And I have now been able to see, it's like, one person, took me on a tour of the house and walked me up and showed me, this is the bedroom and here's this area. And I was like, that's great. Now I can picture it. It's just, I love that. I really love that.
So the online capabilities really provide context that we have never been privy to of that person's living situation, pictures on the wall, the colors that the person prefers, and pets. I've met the dogs and the cats, and every now and then, a child may come in. It really provides the matrix within which that person's life takes place. It has been valuable additional information and connection with people, and it has obviously widened and expanded the frame over two people sitting in my office.
And now perhaps we can move closer to the central mystery, which we mention in our title, is Psyche really present in an online format? Deb, you talked about, summoned or not, God will be present. And I think that we know that the analytic third is present in the virtual encounters. At least I know that it is. I mean, I would say that some of my most kind of profound experiences in analysis, either my own or in providing analysis to someone else, have happened at a distance. It's we do lose something. There's no question, but there also is Psyche's there. Psyche shows up, and it shows up in these kind of synchronicities that happen, but also in deep, 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 deep feeling connections that get evoked, even at great distances. And I think some of it is that there can be a kind of intense privacy and intimacy to being with someone. For example, they're sitting in their apartment, and I'm sitting in my office, but that's very intimate to be sitting with, when you're sitting in your own home. There's more immediacy there, because I work with people in different countries at times. Sometimes the time zones are funny, and I've wound up working with some people kind of very late into the evening, their time, because that is a time that works for them. I don't offer analysis here at 11 o'clock at night. But that's something that winds up happening because of time zone differences. I'm not at 11 o'clock at night because I would be useless at 11 o'clock at night. But for that person, that's a time, when they may feel more comfortable being with their own material in an intimate way. And so it can be highly, highly intimate in a way that sometimes encounters in the office are not.
So maybe what we're really saying is there are gains and losses, and that working online is simply different. It's not different in degree, it's different in kind. And one of the things I appreciate about online work is it is what we've touched on before of the eye contact that you mentioned, Lisa. I forget how many little teeny-weeny muscles there are in the face, but it's well documented. And that a lot of them really cannot be operated consciously, especially things for smile or sadness, for big feeling. That the feeling has to be there for those little muscles to work, and that's what conveys the sense of integrity and genuineness, and we catch it from people. We catch their feelings. And that is very much more visible up close on a screen. And I think it helps to constellate the sense of intimacy and connection.
One of the images that is coming up in me as we're talking is the archetype of the witch and the idea of kind of Hecate. I'm suddenly had this imagining of, Hecate in a cave, looking into a pool of water and seeing things from afar, or, casting spells from a distance, or influencing through the subterranean worlds. And there's something about this online communication that if an ancient person came forward, this would seem like witchcraft.
Yeah,
it would be this bizarre, oracular vision. And the way that we are, in fact, both casting spells and influencing each other from these great distances in ways that feel very immediate. So it evokes that Hecate feeling to me.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Joseph. I really like that. And it also sort of feels like, the spirit Mercurius, is one of the gods of tech, I think. Including, and I think we've all had this, where something happens with the tech and you think about it and it sort of feels like it was a field phenomenon. Like we're having trouble being connected, finding each other kind of content-wise or in terms of the feeling tone in the interaction. And then the connection breaks, and it's like, well, was that a little synchronicity there,
Absolutely. I've had it happen where people are like, Well, I've been thinking about bringing this up, and now it's finally time to tell you.
Click.
Their mouth is hanging open and they're frozen on the screen. I'm totally pinned, to the microphone, and that's it. That's the end of it. And then maybe like 4 seconds later, it comes back on, and they're like, "Oh, wow, I'm really glad I got that off my chest."
Oh, no.
And then I'm like, "Oh, should I tell them that I didn't hear it? What am I going to do?" So there's this horrible comedy going on in all of this as well.
Yes.
I want to come back to another component of this idea of the archetype of Hecate. And I notice that, particularly right now when people are in seclusion, that the sessions take on a much more secretive quality because the space is often shared. So, we'll have clients who are like, the family is in the house, so they're on a balcony, and they're wearing a headset, and they're like pinned over into the corner, vaping madly as they're like, "I just have a little time to talk," and all this intensity of secrecy is like permeating the session that, I don't know, it really heightens everything that's being said.
Yeah. Or people who go out to the car.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a private, enclosed, encapsulated. You're in your little capsule of your little Chevy Chevette or whatever it might be.
Chevy Chevette. That was a good reference. I had a Chevy Chevette.
But it's all about how we manage intimacy and distance when things cut off, of where you have to go, huddled over on your balcony corner or in your car, of how we manage the up close and then further away. It's a relational dynamic that's very different and very new from someone showing up at one's office.
Well, and the interesting thing about that, because I've certainly, some of the people I work with have little kids, right? And there can be I'm managing the little kid while I'm trying to have my analytic session, and it's like, hold on a minute, and you have to go potty, I'll be right there, or whatever. Lisa, do you mind holding on a minute? I'm like, sure. But of course, it's like part of me says, well, where's the temenos there? But there's another way where I know that the work that we're doing, even amid, toileting toddlers, is really good work. And so it's almost like, well, the temenos is held in the relationship. Mm-hmm. There isn't a physical temenos. Mm-hmm. There isn't. We're not in my physical office with the door closed, and the efforts that I've made to have my office space feel like a cozy, juicy, safe container. That's gone. That's out the window. Now we're trying to, put the toddler on the toilet. But there still is the intention of temenos, and it's held in our connection and in our relationship.
Exactly. I think that is, you just really said something I think that's so important, Lisa, which is the relationship itself has to become the container. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the client where the furry body walks across the screen as the cat decides to enter the session. The toddler that has to go potty. That there's something about a relational container that becomes enlarged. It becomes full of surprises. The dog barks, and yet it can serve the analytic relationship in a whole new way because it's not so sequestered. And we learn that we are there and we still have that connection and accord that can weave its way through that person's life with their pets or their kids or the phone that rings in the middle of the session. That we are here and we are the temenos, you and I, for this hour. No matter what else happens, we're here.
And there is that robust heart in the work. And I have to say that there are some clients for whom it does not constellate online. I have had clients say, if I can't meet in the office, I'm going to wait until you're back in the office. That, I don't trust the thickness of the walls in my apartment to be able to make sure the sound does not go someplace I don't want. I've had people very quickly challenge, is Doxy HIPAA compliant? Can we really trust them? Do we even believe what these internet agencies are telling us about not listening in? So it has evoked for some people a tremendous amount of concern about privacy and whether their words are being held with an absolute secrecy, which for some people, it's become obvious now is paramount, and perhaps was paramount all the time, but wasn't quite clear before.
There is this mysterious way where that analytic third gets evoked more readily between some couples, between some pairs than others. And I have wondered if some of that is mediated by online. There is a way that it always feels a little more alive whenever a person's actually in the office. It just does. But I think you're right, Joseph. Besides, privacy concerns, there may just be people for whom it's not going to really work online, that we're just not going to find that kind of right brain to right brain co-regulation over a screen for some mysterious reason, and maybe it would work better in person. The remarkable thing is that you can find it over a screen in many, many cases. I want to go back to this idea about embodiment a bit, because it's something that I think a lot about. I mean, we're obviously living in this kind of Cartesian world, right, where there's this sort of mind-body split. What happens in analysis is obviously a kind of synthesis between kind of left brain, right brain stuff. We're taking subtle felt sensations, intuitions, maybe embodied feelings, and trying to translate that into language and deliver that to the other person and kind of reach integration that way. And so that is a concern that I have about video therapy, is that we're leaving out all of this kind of implicit information that we get from being in each other's presence. However, I will say, surprisingly, and I think it feels somewhat miraculous to me, that sitting with someone over virtual technology, there can be such a wealth of image, intuition, bodily sensations, feeling, emotion welling up, subtle felt sensations. I mean, it's like the whole apparatus is often there. And that's what gives me confidence in it, is that.
What I'm thinking about is that we haven't mentioned, and yet here it is. Every week we do this together over online video and audio.
Yeah.
Every single week. And I feel present and connected. And we wouldn't be able to do this without the technology, although we've also made it a point to get together a couple of times a year in person in an embodied way, where we can have lunch together, take a walk, and really just physically be in the same room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that it's grounded in some amount of lived experience of face-to-face. What's occurring to me right now as we're talking is that as baby boomers and older generations, we're talking as if this is a revelation. Gen X. We're talking as if this is a revelation, that people can have emotional experiences with each other online. And I'm sure like all the millennials and zennials and younger people are like rolling their eyes because, I have plenty of clients in their 20s, and they're on Discord servers and in really intricate games, and they're coming in processing deep, painful or loving relationships with people that they've only ever known from a gaming environment, a very rarefied online environment. And those relationships take up substantial real estate in their souls. So I think for certain generations who have grown up attenuated to all of this way of communicating, this is totally reasonable and even, an expected depth of connection. But to us old folks, I think, we're talking as if, we've rediscovered a light bulb. The light bulbs, they turn on. It's unbelievable. Our young clients really are just patting us on the head, and putting us to bed with some porridge.
It was a good point.
It's a really good point. And I will tell you that I know some young people, like teenagers, who are so tired of Zooming everything and just say, it's not, I want to go hang out with my friends. I want to sit around and hang out with my friends. I don't want to Zoom with my friends. So but you make a good point. This is obviously not new news to anyone younger than we are. So maybe with that, it's a good time to switch to a dream.
Go for it. Hi, this is Deb from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Lisa, and I have been deeply moved by your response to our work. But producing, editing, and distributing it involves substantial expenses, and now we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading, Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month. And at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Once again, please go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Be Our Patron. Thank you.
Today's dream comes from a 31-year-old female who works as a journalist. And here's the dream. I was a magician's apprentice. The magician was old and dying and was in a hurry to pass on his legacy to me. He showed me a wooden box with jewelry. The box was placed on the lid of a deep well to the underworld. He opened the box and gave me 2 black diamonds and told me he had locked a dangerous demon inside the well by casting a spell with the diamonds. If the diamonds were ever to fall inside the well, the demon would get back its power and escape the well. It was my job now to make sure no one threw the diamonds into the well. The magician then turned into an old man, who I think was my grandfather. He was suffering from dementia and kept trying to put one of the diamonds in the well, which he succeeded with when I turned my back on him for a moment. The demons came out. One was a big blue lobster. They were free, but had lost their evil powers since I still had one of the diamonds in my hand. The lobster demon demanded I use my power to lift the spell from the diamond, which I did, but nothing happened. The demons were still powerless. I realized that the demons had just been in the well for so long that they had forgotten how to be evil, and now they were loving creatures that just wanted to be free. And the dreamer gives us some context. She says, I recently had a serious conflict with my boss. I have been thinking about quitting, but afraid of the consequences. I'm feeling micromanaged and unable to perform my best. I have also been thinking about trying to get pregnant, but I'm also afraid what that would bring and if I even can. And she says that the main feelings in the dream are responsibility, dedication, loyalty, and stress. And finally, she offers that her grandfather has been dead for a long time. So this was another man who looked nothing like him. And the wooden box looked just like a box my parents had, in which we kept valuables like passports and jewelry. This is one of those lovely, very archetypal fairy tale-like dreams, isn't it?
This is a short story.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Isn't it? It doesn't, and reminiscent of the genie in the bottle, only
Yes.
here they're the creatures in the well.
Mm-hmm.
And being a magician's apprentice,
Yeah.
and being handed on.
Receiving a legacy.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
As I'm sitting with the dream, I'm just noticing the arc from her apprenticeship through these various encounters to the discovery that these primal archetypal levels of the unconscious, which were frightening, are actually loving and can be related to. Mm-hmm. So, although there's so many different parts in the dream, I'm wanting to just hold the beginning and the end to look at that single alchemical movement. So to become a magician's apprentice is to learn something about the hidden, the unconscious, the mysterious, to gain some kind of proficiency in this inner and underworld. And I think even looking at medieval manuscripts and grimoires, one of the attainments of the well-trained magician is the ability to tame the dangerous and demonic forces of the unconscious. So even though it doesn't say that she becomes a highly proficient magician in the dream explicitly, she has achieved one of the goals of medieval magic, which is to take the demonic and make it benign and make it serve a higher purpose. Mm-hmm. So in that way, the dream feels really gratifying to me.
I'm aware that the magician is old and dying. So this is a content or an attitude in the psyche that is kind of lived out its time. And now whatever that content has been holding or carrying, it's ready to be passed on to the conscious part of the personality. So something's getting integrated here that's been held in the unconscious. And the conscious personality is going to be able to handle this in a conscious way moving forward. The other thing that I love about this dream is that the one thing that can't happen, the diamonds can't go in the well, is of course like set up that inevitably that's going to happen. Even the fact that they're kept on the lid of the well, and this happens all the times in fairy tales. For example, in the fairy tale Bluebeard says, here are the keys to the whole castle. Go in whatever room you want, but this room. Don't go into this one room, And of course, what's the first thing the heroine does when he leaves? Is she goes into that one room. So it's this thing that there's, and this is just, I think, so true in the psyche, that whatever is forbidden or taboo, that is the thing that must happen. So it has to be that these diamonds go down the well, or at least one of them.
I'm thinking about diamonds and what are diamonds, that these would be the magical thing. Thinking about how diamonds are perfect. They are basically indestructible, kind of like gold, and eternal value. And they're black diamonds. So they seem to contain something of shadow in a way that is inherently part of their enduring, valuable structure.
Yeah, so it's really an image of a kind of positive shadow quality, isn't it? Because it's the stone, the worthless stone, that's also indestructible and eternal and of incredible value, paradoxically.
And we talk in Jungian terms about the philosopher's stone and the symbolism of a stone and of a diamond and its ancient qualities and enduring qualities and its magical powers.
I think the image of a well is really interesting here too. It's kind of an archaic image that doesn't necessarily show up in a lot of modern dreams. So it adds to more of that kind of fairy tale feeling about this. But, in Irish mythology, wells were often places of entry into the other realm.
And there are still in Ireland magical wells that people go to, and there's a little ritual that you do when you approach the well with the water and with your hand. And I'm thinking about how in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, wells were where people gathered. It's the source of life for a village, and you go to the well when you're waiting for something to happen. You sit by the well.
Yeah.
is such a great image of the connection to the unconscious.
Right, because wells are places where you can draw up the quenching waters from the depths.
Yes.
And there is a mystery there. It's like underground, there's cold, clear water. And that isn't an analog for the psyche, that in our depths, there is what we need to quench us and renew us. What do we make of the lobster?
That's just where I was going. I was looking at the dream. I'm going, the big blue lobster. Of all things that this demon could be, he is a big blue lobster.
And of course, blue lobsters do occur in nature, but only very rarely, which is also like black diamonds. Like I think black diamonds occur. Can anyone help me with that? Is that a real thing? But it's not the natural color.
No, black diamonds do occur. They were just held very little value until the 20th century. Black diamonds were often diamonds that had a distribution of other minerals in it, like graphite or pyrite, or had numerous fissures in it, which caused the light to not refract correctly. And now they're enhanced in this pressurization process, which adds graphite to it, making them darker. But they've kind of become fashionable at this point. But I want to just sit with this, a much plainer feeling about it. The grandfather uses diamonds to banish his demons. And I'm just thinking back to a certain generation, my own grandfather's generation, where money or things of value, if they were kept close and if they were collected, treasures were collected, that it could keep demons, it could keep misfortune away from us. It might even keep away the demons of our own instinctive and primal fears and appetites. So things of value can give us a veneer of civilization and refinement. And if those treasures and if those worldly acquisitions were to fall away, would our own instinctive demons rise up and suddenly make us primal and competing and ferocious? So I think there is, perhaps just in a very psychosocial way, a relationship between treasures and instinctive dangers, which for this young woman does not hold the same feeling of danger as it might have in the 2 generations before her. When I think about the lobster, I think about the most primal life force. Lobsters, crayfish, all of these shellfish, horseshoe crabs have apparently remained kind of unchanged for millions of years. They evolved, created this very successful adaptation, and have, continued to exist in the oceans from kind of time immemorial in a way. So for something that ancient, that alien to human consciousness, to rise up from the depths suggests that she is in touch with a very primal part of her psyche that she can in fact feel loving towards, and she at least believes is loving towards her. I think that's a very unique relationship. Oftentimes in analysis, people may feel rumblings from the depths, deep, primordial, ancient gods, so to speak, wake up in the psyche, and people are profoundly unseated by that. We have this alchemical image of the green lion eating the sun, or the lobster could have eaten everything around it in this kind of Godzilla, Mothra kind of movie.
Yeah.
But in this miraculous way, she is at a place in her development that she can interact with these very deep forces and, like a lion tamer, create this benign, or at least initially, benign relationship. It seems to me that it's a very redemptive dream and suggests what could be a radical new movement in her psyche, a tremendous amount of available energy.
That she might need in addressing either these work issues or perhaps this pregnancy issue. That there is something ancient and instinctual, and it has some aggression attached to it. I mean, lobsters are, notable for their claws and their armor.
Yes.
And, perhaps that's the energy she's needing to get in touch with. And it's there.
And it just wants to be free, as she says in the final line.
Right.
That some part of her psyche is not interested in being put into a well or a fish tank or a cage of any kind. Wants to be out in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about these terrible demons that then turn out to be, at least one of them, is simply a lobster. Which, if it were huge, I mean, if we made the lobster the size of Godzilla or something, it would be terrifying. But in fact, it's not so terrifying. And the color blue is associated with sort of, celestial kinds of qualities, water. It's usually the psyche relates in a positive way to the color blue. Although we can also say we're feeling blue. So I'll leave that to the dreamer to think about what blue means to her. But she says that the feelings in the dream, despite her real life conflict with her boss and musing about getting pregnant, is responsibility, dedication, loyalty, and stress. But look at those qualities of they're also forward moving and loving and connected, And I'm thinking, wow, and this dream kind of reflects all that, if all these things can happen, something loving actually comes forth at the end. So it is a redemptive dream and a deeply reassuring dream that her psyche's dedicated, loyal, responsible intentions, almost ensure the sort of happy ending here.
In addition, the well acts as a container. Something goes in and it is sealed off. Water might seep into the bottom of the well, but it's probably not an open river flowing around. And so we're in the realm of containing something that is instinctive and initially perceived as evil. And we know from the alchemical work that when something is contained and frustrated because of its containment, if it's held long enough, it goes through a purifying and consecrating process. In the Splendor Solis images, we see a dragon finally become a luminous and divine spirit. Lead in some systems becomes gold. And in the alchemy of this story, fear becomes love. Through containment and the locking away of something.
Yeah, and the container is importantly a natural space that goes into the depths, but also has a man-made kind of outer entrance. There's
access.
Something about and there's an thank you. There's an access that's been made by humans. So there's a conscious access relationship to this depth. The consciousness is working with the unconscious in this image.
It's a great image of the ego-self axis.
Yes.
And her willingness to engage with the depths of the unconscious that seem to be monstrous, of, these horrible demons down there. And then, of course, that's where the gold is, that these are loving creatures instead. But the ego-self axis is a great way to imagine consciousness, ego, my sense of who I am and what I do, I'm in charge here, down into the depths of something Jung called the self, which is a little spark, or maybe a bigger spark of the divine, that really undergirds us as humans. The well and going down into the depths is a great image for that. And what gets pulled up is loving.
The lobster can also be seen as a symbol of the reproductive force. Like a lot of marine animals, when a lobster is gestating its young, we've probably seen this when we've eaten lobsters, and you open the tail, there can be hundreds or thousands of eggs distributed inside the body of the creature. So the blue lobster can also represent something about her own sexual, primal nature and her own reproductive power, which is being called forward in this idea about getting pregnant, that there's something pre-mammal, pre-human that knows how to be pregnant. And the reproduction of a species is at the basis of all organic life in this world. It is the most ancient demand that is happening all around us at all times. And depending on the culture we're raised in, that reproductive forces, sexual forces, are often put into a well or into a cage and, sealed off and thought of as dangerous. But when you're considering getting pregnant, guess what? That cat's got to get let out of the bag, or else it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's great.
But also, I think there's another generative image here, and she says that her conflict with her boss is because she's feeling micromanaged. So there's another, your image of the cage and being constrained, where she wants to be more generative. That also relates to being pregnant, but my life force is going somewhere else. I don't want to be constrained here. I want that force to come up out of the depths and have some freedom and expression.
And if we think about a compensation for this conflict around micromanagement, the old magician is controlling and micromanaging the life in the wells through the power of the diamonds, and that he is wanting her to collude with this repressive management of forces, as we see a perfect enantiodromia, where one thing becomes its opposite, that the guard of repression suddenly, unconsciously, absent-mindedly, what we might call in a parapraxis or Freudian slip, I'm sitting here over the well. Now, these diamonds, don't let them fall in the well. There's the diamond down the well.
Right. He's the one that puts it down the well. Yeah.
Absolutely. This Freudian slip of the hands, because every time we are overly repressing something, somewhere in the unconscious, the idea of setting it free is thrumming in the unconscious. And waiting for its opportunity to switch places and take hold of the reins.
Yeah, we can never let a week go by without thrumming.
Thrumming for everyone.
Well, it's a really cool dream.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.